Okay, started. So now I can actually close it since, yep. Okay, perfect. So now I can close it. Great. Close this one. And now we're gonna go ahead and start this question and answer. Hopefully the fireworks aren't gonna be too loud. They probably are. Shouldn't disturb us at all. But this is it's 4th of July. Okay, great. So here we go. So basically the first question is based on the learner, which is the student. I think you should change that into the student. But let's keep it like that for now. So is a div by default a row container? First of all, I want to see how this sounds like. Hopefully my OBS does not crash. Let me see what it sounds like. Hello, hello, hello. Levels are good, but levels are good. Okay, let me start my YouTube. I'm going live right now. And now I got to start my encoder. And now, okay, started. Oh, I'm still live. So now I can actually close it since I'm trying to see if you can hear the fireworks. So now I can close it. Great. Close this one. And now we're gonna go ahead and start this question and answer. Hopefully the fireworks aren't gonna be too loud. They probably are. All right, so let's forget about the fireworks. Let's just keep moving. We got to get this done, no? Okay, great. So let me minimize this. So now, so the learner, his question is a div by default a row container? So I expanded this. What I did was highlight it, and then I used my trigger right here. Expand bullet, not terminology. I expanded the bullet. And this is a result. Is a div by default a row container? So this is how it works, right? A plain div element is block level by default. So it behaves like a full width box that starts on a new line in a normal document flow. So it is not a row layout system by itself. If children appear side by side, that visual is usually coming from the children's own display behavior, not from the parent being a true row container. So in the token sandbox blank sandbox.html, we're gonna go ahead and enter this this element. We're gonna create this element. All right. So let's go ahead and go to our blank sandbox. We're gonna go ahead and click it, and then right click and open live server. And inside HTML, we're gonna enter this line, this block of code, HTML code, no. And we're gonna copy it and enter it right here. And there we go. We have 2 buttons, and this is inline-block, meaning that they are a column. They're not rows. Right? By default. Well, actually, they're rows, but by default, they're not stacked vertically. They're stacked horizontally. So that would be one question to ask, right? Again, we're gonna use our user agent over here. Are these buttons row or column? So I know they are inline block, so they must be rows stack vertically, stack horizontally, stack horizontally. I believe that's how you spell it, no? Yeah, my spell always goes out the window whenever. So let's right click whenever I'm doing these videos. Yeah, I forgot it. I forgot an L. So let's press enter and see what the user agent says. You're spot on about the default behavior because this button elements are inline block by default. They sit next to each other on the same line, creating a horizontal row. However, since they are wrapped in a container div class action, right? Their layout can be completely changed using CSS. For example, if someone adds display flex direction column to that action class, it will immediately stack vertically into a column regardless of their inline block nature. Currently, with no CSS applied to them, they are arranged as a row. Great. So now let's go back to our transcript. So basically, this CSS, the intent default div remains block level unless layout is explicitly changed. So this is where we explicitly change it. So display flex, right? The intent right here explicitly turns the parent to a row layout container. Why? Because we're using the attribute of class, a class attribute with the attribute value with the action attribute value. All right, this is the value of the attribute, right? So okay, great. So let's go ahead and keep moving forward. So basically now the intent here is that we're gonna give it a gap of 10 pixels as reliable spacings between children in that row. So this spacing right here is right here. So if we change it, well, let's add the CSS first, right? So now we understand what this does, okay? So we're gonna use like this in the blank sandbox, right? We're gonna type everything. We're gonna take this rule, I'm gonna copy it. And we're gonna paste it here. And first of all, I wanna make sure I get the attribute terminology correct, or the phrasing. So let me copy this. So class is an attribute. Guys, this is how we learn. You ask questions on attribute, and the value is an attribute value. All right, let's see what he says. Exactly, you got it perfectly. In HTML, the breakdown looks like this. Attribute is the class. This is the name of the property you are setting. An attribute value is actions. This is the specific value assigned to that property wrapped in quotes. So in your code, HTML div class action, class is the browser's no, class tells the browser what kind of identifier you are using, and actions is the specific name you gave it so you could target it in your CSS class, right? Or rule. Perfect. So I was right about that yet again. Now, if we want, we can change this to 20, and then this gap is gonna widen in width. Right? So let's say this is 20, you see? So let's put it back to 10. Great. So let me ask this question, right? Is gap by default is gap by default so we're giving it 10 pixels, a gap of 10 pixels. So is gap by default horizontal, and because in this case we are giving this container a gap of 10 pixels, and they will separate by that amount horizontally. Okay, so again, my spelling is off. What happened here? It's basically saying, hey dude, you don't know how to spell. So by default, did I spell it wrong? Let's see what he says here. The gap property isn't horizontal by default. Instead, it always follows the direction of the layout. Since you have a display flex on the action container, gap looks at the flex direction. Because flex direction default to row, your buttons are stacked horizontally. Therefore, the gap gives it a 10 pixels, separates them horizontally. If you change the container to flex direction column, the bottom would stack vertically in that exact same gap. 10 pixels would automatically switch to separating them vertically. Think of gap as an intelligent spacer that simply puts room between items in whichever direction they happen to be flowing. Okay, great. So that's good. Now we know. This is a learning moment. All right, guys. So let's go ahead and move to the next section. So basically what we're going to do here is, based on my expand, I expanded this question. Now, based on that question, he's going to give me as much information as possible. So this is the exact moment the parent div.action becomes the layout's controller for the two buttons, right? So it's still explaining it, to tell you the truth. So the expand started here, and the expand basically gave me all this information here. It's the 7 sections, okay? So the first section is how it works. The second one is used like this in the blank sandbox. So that's cool that it actually makes us work, and it makes us work hands-on. So that's what we're doing, and so that's perfect. So then this is the use like this in the blank sandbox. You type everything. That's exactly what I did, but it starts from here also. I typed this too, right? So again, this is the exact moment the parent div action becomes the layout controller for the two buttons. This is when, yeah, again, this is the exact moment the parent div, right, with the action class, right, becomes the layout controller for the two buttons. So why we chose this, right? So why did we choose this or this, right? Teaching the default first, and then adding display flex gives a clean before and after mental model. So learners can see that looks like a row and is a row container are different ideas, right? So basically, so before this, let me see, Control Control X, they buttons automatically stack inline regardless. So that's why it's inline. So we can ask them this, right? Why is it in? Why are the buttons stacked vertically without the class rule, the class CSS declaring rules. So let's see what he says, because they're inline. Based on the live preview screen, the buttons are actually still sitting side by side in horizontal row. They haven't stacked vertically yet. I mean, no. What I meant to ask was horizontally. But I think he gave us the answer anyway. If we keep reading, he's going to tell us. If we keep reading, he's going to tell us, you'll see, they haven't stacked right because there are no CSS rules written type, whatever section. The browser relies entirely on the default settings. The div clef actions containers is a block element, so it takes up the full width. The buttons elements inside are inline, so they flow horizontally next to each other. If you want them to stack vertically, right? So I could update this and see what happens now, right? The button stack horizontally by default because of how the browser naturally treats button elements. In HTML, elements have a default display property assigned by the browser known as the user agent style sheet, right? That's very important for you to be able to distinguish this when you go to the DevTools. You have to distinguish this. Once you distinguish the user agent style sheet, you can compare it with the default settings of the browser and the settings that you put or that the user put in the CSS. Okay, so keep that in mind. Buttons are displayed inline block by default. Inline block elements behave like text words. Just like the words in this sentence, they flow right next to each other from left to right until they run out of space on the line, right? So even without a single line of your CSS, the browser automatically places the set buttons side by side in horizontal row because that's their inherent nature, right? So let's go back and put this back, Control V. Oh, why? Okay, great. So here we go to the next step, all right? So we're gonna keep reading. So I wonder why he chose button as the main example, even though they're inline, you know? Let's read this sentence one more time. Teaching the default first, then adding display flex gives a clean before and after mental model. I guess it's because that's part of the application that we're building, which is a counter with two buttons. So if I were to, let's say, take this away, right, again, X, and then I would turn this into a div, right? What would happen? Let's turn them into a div right here. Let's create another one. Shift Alt and then press down, right? And then I'm gonna change this into a div instead, right? Great. And then I'm gonna turn this one into a div also. Okay. And then we're gonna copy this, right? Control copy, and then paste it in here. See, this is what I don't like. You saw how it disappeared? See, now they stack vertically because inherently they're rows, but they take the full 100 width of the viewport. That's what div containers do. But since they were buttons in the first place, right? I wonder why it disappeared. But since they were buttons, they're gonna stack horizontally. Okay. I wonder why the code disappears. I'm gonna have to fix that up. That to me is a bug. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and move forward. It's good that I explained that. And then here, again, we stop reading, right? So teaching the default first, then adding display flex gives a clean before after mental model. Learners can see that, okay, we did read this, that looks like a row and is a row container are different ideas. So yeah, like you have to understand this sentence here, saying that the div contain the div, right? Let's read the question one more time. Is a div by default a row container? Is the div by default a row container? So the the answer to that was this one over here. Mentor. Great question. By default, a div is just a regular block level box. That means it naturally stretches across the available width and sits on its own line in the normal page flow. So if your button look like they are already in a row, that visual can be misleading. Buttons are inline block by default, so they often sit side by side when there is enough horizontal space, but that is not the same thing as saying the parent div is a row layout container. A true container is intentional. You turn it on with layout rules like flexbox. Once you set display flex action, then that div is officially controlling its children as a row with tools like gap, alignment, and wrapping available in a predictable way. So that sentence one more time, right? Let's read it one more time because if you read it carefully, is a div by default a row container? Meaning, does it contain um elements elements that are placed in a row? By default, no. If it was by default, that means that each and every element that is contained inside the div container, they would be set horizontally like this. So is this div container by default a row container? Meaning does it contain elements that are stacked in rows? No. So we can prompt them this question too, right? Let's prompt them this question. Let's see if I got it right. Does this question imply that, right? Let me go like this. Control V. Right? Does this question implies that the div is a container of row elements that stack horizontally? Let's see what he says. Yes, that's exactly what the question is asking, but the premises behind it contains a very common misconception. When someone asks if the div container is a row container by default, they are usually asking, does a div automatically makes its children sit side by side in a horizontal row? I think I rest my case right there. So we understand this, right? By default, a div is a block level element. This means it behaves like a column container. It takes up 100% of the available width. It stacks its children vertically, one on top of another, assuming those children are also block elements. The catch in your sandbox, the only reason your buttons are sitting side by side is your div right now is because the buttons themselves are inline block. If you put two divs inside your action container instead of buttons, they would stack vertically like a column. To actually turn divs into a true row container, that forces everything inside to align horizontally. You have to explicitly give it CSS like display flex. Right, since flex default to flex direction row. So I rest my case. That was perfect. So now we can move on to the next section, which is the side note terminology, side note normal flow. So the normal flow means the browser's default layout order before flexbox or grid rules are applied. So in this case, the default order is row, right? And like on a block element is a block element. Oh wow, really? Okay. So again, by default is a block level. All right. A plain div is a block level by default. It's a block element. Okay, great. So sign out row container. In practice, developers call a parent a row container when it is actively controlling child elements, for example, with Flexbox, not merely because children happen to sit on one line. In practice, a develop in practice, developers call a parent a row container when it's actively controlling child elements, for example, with Flexbox, not merely because children happen to sit one on one line. So it's only called a row container in practice if it's being controlled, in this case through CSS, right? Through the class, right? When it's actively controlling child elements, for example, with Flexbox, all right? So phrasing on camera, this is where we have to right click here and print current document to HTML. And once we do that, we click here and then we right click and open with live server, all right? So now, so this was the first step. We did this already. And now we're going to expand it, and now we're going to phrasing. So phrasing on camera. These are the phrases that you would use. In other words, how would you put this information into a sentence? So by default, a div is a block level box in normal flow. It is not a flex formatting context. This is spec accurate, aligned with CSS display concept, black formatting versus flex formatting context. So treat action as a layout row. It becomes the row controller only after display flex. That's design system, role-based language, that's the verdict. This is based on design system and role-based language. The buttons can stand in line by coincidence, but the parent is not driving the traffic yet. This is viewer friendly. Not sure how friendly that is. The buttons can stand in a line by coincidence. By coincidence. Let me look at the definition. A remarkable concurrence of event or circumstances without apparent causal connection. I don't know why he would use coincidence though. A diff is always a row by default. Misleading default block layout is not equivalent to a flex row container. If items are side by side, the parent must be flex. Misleading inline or inline block children can also appear on one line. All right, guys. So I prefer reading the rest in the actual markdown file. That's where I'm going. Okay, so no, visual results and layout mechanisms are different layers. They look horizontal. Just describe what you see. The parent is a row container describes which rule set is controlling that layout. So basically, what rule in the CSS is controlling that layout that makes the parent a row container. Okay, so the mentor, we read this already. Great by default. A div is just a regular block level box. So we read this already. Virtual container is intentional. We understand that already. And here's the explicit row container, right? Explicitly, we took that action container, right? That's what we called it here, I think. Yeah, see, it disappears all the time. So I want to see where, if you put two divs inside your action container here, see? So this is called the action container, or Well, this is the action container up here. This is the action container because it's called action. But div is also a container. All right, cool. Let's keep moving. So now we're up to number 2. So flex default direction. So learn it. Isn't flex by default a row? It says yes. Once display flex is set, flex direction defaults to a row. So parent versus child layout row. So learn it. Is the parent a row on the div? Is the parent a row of the div? Is the parent a row of the div? So not by default, the parent main demo car is a block layout unless you style it otherwise. So he says not by default. Okay. The div action becomes the row container for its own children only after you apply flex to action. Okay, so that's understood. It's just the question is misleading. Let me see. I'm gonna copy this and I'm gonna ask him what this is mean. The question is a little misleading. I see what you're getting at. Yes, phrase that way. The question is very confusing and technically messed up. Let's untangle the terminology so it makes actual sense. Is the parent a row? In layout terms like flexbox or grid, a row describes the direction in which a container ranges children. If a container set is children side by side, is acting as a row container of the div. This is where the phrasing trips over itself. The div is the parent. Doesn't have a row. It doesn't have a row of the div. It doesn't have a row of the div. The div itself either is or is not a row container for the buttons inside. Is the parent a row of the div? Okay, great. So it's a little confusing, but we can keep it moving. How to phrase it correctly? If someone is trying to ask about the layout behavior, they should ask one of these 2 questions. Is a div inherently a row container? Is a div inherently a row container? Yeah. No, it's not. Are the children's inside the div currently arranged in a row? Yes, but only because the children are buttons, which are naturally inline-block. So you are completely right to find the phrasing misleading. It mixes up the parent, the div, and the layout direction row in a way that doesn't quite fit standard web design vocabulary. So again, I think it's because it has to do with the buttons. This question is the parent a row of the div? All right, let's keep it moving. So why instructions say create a row container? Because the prompt describes intent layout row. Because the prompt describes intent layout row, not role default behavior. You create the structural container now and apply role behaviors with CSS. So root design tokens. So how should root tokens be defined? Define reusable tokens for background and text first. And that's exactly what we did. Right, but that question was based on me asking whether it should be called an element. And I mean, I don't want to, how should root tokens be defined? I should say, Can root be called an element? Yeah, I don't even want to answer that question. Let me see. Can I call the root an element? He's probably gonna say no. This is a rule. Technically no, but you're very close. And CSS rules classified as a pseudo class, not an element. Here's the exact distinction. The element, the actual element on your HTML is the HTML tag. The pseudo class root, this is a special selector that targets the highest level element in the document. In an HTML web page, root represents and points directly to the HTML element. So why say root instead of HTML? You might wonder why developers write root instead of just HTML when declaring global CSS variable. There are two main reasons: higher specificity. Pseudo classes have more weight specificity than a regular element selector. If you define a variable in root, it's harder for other accidental styles to override it. So in other languages, XML, SVG, the top level isn't HTML. Using root makes the CSS generic enough to work perfectly in those styles too. So while you can safely think of it as the selector that grabs HTML element, calling for pseudo class keeps use technically vocabulary perfectly accurate. Okay, and it disappeared again. Let me see if he understands why. Why is my HTML disappearing from the HTML pane? Let me see if he could give me an answer to that. I think it has to do with the cache. He's taking longer than usual, and I think he's looking through the code. It's very rare that he takes this long. So I might have to stop him, stop it, pause it, or whatever. Restart this tab or the Gemini tab. Yeah, it's taking too long. So let me see what's next. So centralize and mute and button colors. So add muted text and buy reset normal plus hover tokens. Yes, centralize all those states and roots. Okay. Mentor notes. Fixed HTML typo is present at ID. Right, because I had to take off the back tick. This tick right here must be exact. So it says here an HTML markup, and your HTML markup vanished from the HTML pane in that sandbox. It is almost certainly due to one of these common sandbox quirks, the live preview auto sync glitch. Many of these real-time playground attempts to parse and sync your code as you type. If you accidentally leave an HTML tag open, like the div, and posing or writing invalid syntax, the sandbox parsers can crash behind the scene. When it tries to recover, it occasionally clears or blanks out the active input pane. A semantic selector all plus backspace because the text editor inside the browser pane has focus while you type. It's incredibly easy to accidentally hit hotkey combo like Control plus A, right? Followed immediately by character and backspace without realizing it instantly wipes the pane. Session timeout or auto refresh. If the local development server or the sandbox script is self reloaded in the background, it resets the states of the editor. Since the particular sandbox notes, no save, no refresh, any setting under the hood script reset will instantly wipe your unsaved progress back to blank. So, how to protect your code right now? The golden rule: always keep a notepad or code editor like VS open on the side, write your code there, and paste it into the sample. Use the run button. If you have to paste a large chunk of HTML, turn off your autopilot typing, paste it in, and immediately hit run to force the sandbox to commit in the build. Okay, so I guess I gotta press the button run. Okay, so let's go. Let's keep it moving. Does muted mean changeable? No. Muted means visually toned, less prominent. It becomes easy to change because you put it in variable, but muted itself is a design meaning. So mutable versus muted. I meant mutable like let. Correct distinction. Mutable value can change. Immutable reassignment block cannot be reassigned. Is reassignable, is not reassignable. So box size and border box. Why use this globally? So declare width stays predictable when border are added. So declare width stays predictable when border are added. So box size and border box. So I think I'm gonna run I'm going to run one here about this. Let's go ahead and expand this. So declare width stays predictable when padding borders are added. I'm gonna expand this just to get a understanding, a much better understanding. Let's go. I think this is the best way to work, people. I'm gonna ask my Gemini friend questions, and then when I'm done asking him questions, I'm most likely gonna have to take all this, right? And then paste it in here, and then turn it into a markdown file. So we're gonna keep it. So basically it's the same thing here. I'm pretty sure I understand. I'll expand the selected line using your exact expand bullet structure. I've located the exact section and I'm now inserting a full 7-point expand block. Great. So let's go ahead and move on with this one. So how it works, this sets every element to use the border box sizing model. Every element. Where declared with width and height include padding and border. Oh, it includes padding and border to it prevents surprise growth when you add spacing, which make cards and button sizing more predictable while building layouts. It prevents surprise and growth when you add spacing. So we're gonna go ahead and go to the token docs, right? Mini shop live server.html. And then we're gonna go ahead and read the box size and border box. Intent, keep width, height, math predictable across all elements. And then in the demo card, we have a width of a minimum 100 and at 420 pixels. Car stays within target with width range. And then here's the pattern. The padding's inside the container, inner spacing without expanding past expected visual size. And we got the border. Border include in final box sizing. And this is, remember, this is the variable method is calling the card border CSS custom property, which is global or global property. And the border included in final box size. So we're gonna use like this in the blank sandbox. I'm supposed to type everything. So this is only the CSS though. Where's the HTML? I guess we're gonna use the same HTML. That's okay. I don't think we need to do this right now. Actually, let's do it because it's gonna make the buttons round corners, and I just want you to see that. So it's gonna make it round corners, right? If we go over here, get the HTML, go all the way up here. Here's the HTML, and I'm going to control copy, control paste, and I'm gonna click run. And we left a div in here. Let me see. Oh yeah, because I took both. It's only supposed to be one container. I took both containers. All control V, and I'm gonna press run. So it can so it could be set in the memory. Hopefully it doesn't disappear. So right in here, I'm gonna go ahead all the way down here. And we're gonna go ahead and take this universal selector. I'll make sure that he uses the keyword or the terminology universal. So yeah, box size and border box button. It's gonna have a padding inside. That's why the words are so far apart from the top and the bottom, the left and the right, because of the padding. So 10 to the top, 20 to the y-axis to that. So it's 10 vertically and 20 horizontally. Okay, so let me click run once again. So now, doesn't look like we have any syntax error. And I think that it messes up when I hit the back. If I were to click here and then click the back button, it would then disappear because now the sandbox gets a little confused, like he said up here about it. I think he did say something. Yeah, disappearing. He says here something about if you accidentally leave an HTML tag open or write invalid syntax, the sandbox parcel can crash behind the scenes when it tries to recover. So many of these attempt to parse and sync your code at the same time. So yeah. Okay, so let's go over here. So with border box active, your button and card dimensions remain stable as padding and borders are applied. Why this choice? A global border box reset removes layouts and math traps early, especially for beginners. It is a safer than troubleshooting with overflow later, and it keeps components spacing decisions simple and consistent. So the side note of box model. CSS box model describes contents, padding, border, and margins as separate layers around an element. So here's the sign on contents box default. Browser's default to content box where padding and border are added outside the declare width and height. So here's the phrasing on camera. We got to go ahead and right click and print to document. We're going to go over here. And I believe it's already updated. See? Ah, see, it went away again. So now we gotta scroll down and look for that section. And here it is. Box size. Box sizing. So the border box switches sizing. So declared width includes padding and border. Border box switches sizing. So declared width includes padding and border. Think of this as our global sizing contact for every component. It's a global sizing contract for every component. It keeps your card from secretly getting fatter when you add padding. Okay. All right. So let's keep reading over here. So no, box sizing affects how elements dimensions are calculated, not how elements are positioned and flow. With math and layout flows are related, but not the same concept. So, body should remove margin, center content, use readable font, apply gradients. Yes, a clean baseline. So this is like the reset CSS. And the fallback logic is system UI primary and others are fallback. Okay, guys, I think I'm gonna check out. See you guys tomorrow. I'm a little tired. I'm gonna go ahead and rest. See you guys tomorrow. It was a pleasure being here with you. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you in the next video.